Hi, I'm writing this from a throwaway because some of my former coworkers lurk here, and honestly, I don't have the energy for another round of office whispers. This is long, but I need to get it out somewhere people might understand. If you've ever been the invisible one at work, this is probably going to hit close to home. I worked at that company for almost 3 years. Not 3 months, not a probation period. 3 full years of arriving early, leaving late, answering emails on weekends, and being the person everyone came to when something quietly needed to be fixed before it turned into a disaster. My official title was Operations Coordinator. No impressive badge, no leadership keywords, no private office. I sat at a desk near the printer, which already tells you a lot. Unofficially, though, I was the connective tissue. Contracts passed through me, deadlines passed through me, vendor emails, legal drafts, last-minute corrections, budget clarifications. All of it passed through my inbox at some point. I didn't mind at first. I actually liked being competent. I liked knowing how things worked behind the scenes. I liked that calm feeling of preventing chaos before anyone else even noticed it coming. I thought, stupidly, that being reliable would eventually translate into respect. Enter my boss. Let's call him Mark. Mid-40s, immaculate suits, permanent look of mild irritation like the world was inconveniencing him by existing. The kind of manager who loved to talk about vision and big picture, but couldn't find a file unless someone else put it directly on his desktop and renamed it for him. From the beginning, something felt off. He was polite in that corporate, hollow way during my first weeks, but there were signs. Little ones. The kind you brush off because you don't want to be dramatic. He never used my name in meetings. Ever. It was always she, or operations, or, once memorably, that position. When people asked questions that were clearly operational, he'd answer vaguely and then look at me like, handle it, without actually acknowledging me. The first time he called me background noise, I laughed. I genuinely thought it was a joke. We were alone in the open office late one evening. I was finishing a report he needed for a board update. He was scrolling on his phone, half listening to something I was explaining about timelines. "You do realize you're basically here just for order," he said, still not looking up. I paused. "What do you mean?" "So there's always someone in the office," he added casually. "Someone to keep things moving." Background noise. That's the phrase that stuck. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe that's just how he talked. I needed the job. I needed stability. And, if I'm being honest, I still believed that hard work would speak for itself. Over time, his comments got sharper, but always wrapped in plausible deniability. Nothing HR would care about. Nothing you could quote without sounding petty. "Don't overcomplicate things. This isn't strategic work. Let's leave the ideas to people with decision-making authority." "You're very diligent," in a supportive way. Supportive. Like furniture. Still, I kept going. I made myself useful in ways that couldn't be ignored, or so I thought. I started catching errors before they reached clients. I flagged expiring contracts. I streamlined a few internal processes just to make everyone's lives easier. I never presented them as my ideas. I just fixed things. That was my mistake. The day with the pens was when something shifted, even though I didn't fully realize it yet. It was a normal morning. Coffee half cold, inbox already screaming. We had a tight week ahead. A big deal in progress. Multiple departments involved. I was reviewing timelines when Mark walked over carrying 2 cardboard boxes. Without warning, he dropped them on my desk. Hard. Pens spilled everywhere. Red, blue, black, rolling onto the floor. "We've got a mess with the pens," he said loudly. Too loudly. Red with red, blue with blue. A couple of heads turned. I looked up at him. Is this urgent? I asked, genuinely confused. He smiled. Not kindly. For you. Yes, he said. The rest of us don't have time for nonsense. People laughed. Not full laughter. That awkward, nervous office chuckle that means thank God it's not me. I felt my face burn, but I nodded. What else was I supposed to do? I gathered the pens. I sorted them. I swallowed the humiliation because that's what you do when you're the background noise. But something inside me went very, very quiet that day. And that silence would matter later. I didn't walk out after the pens. I didn't slam a door. I didn't cry in the bathroom either, even though that's what every fiber of my body wanted to do. I finished sorting them, wiped my desk, and opened my laptop like nothing had happened. That's the thing about being the reliable one. You don't get dramatic exits. You just keep going. At least, that's what I used to think. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was more like watching the temperature drop slowly and realizing too late that you're freezing. Mark's behavior changed in small, precise ways. Surgical, almost. He stopped copying me on emails that directly involved my work. He started scheduling meetings about operational changes without inviting me, then acting annoyed when things didn't line up. "Oh, I assumed you'd just handle it," he'd say afterward, shrugging. He also started rewriting history. That was the part that really messed with my head. A process I'd built 6 months earlier, a tracking system that prevented contracts from quietly expiring, suddenly became Mark's initiative in meetings. I sat there listening to him explain it to senior management using my exact wording, even the same examples. I remember gripping my pen so hard my hand hurt. I told myself maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe he genuinely forgot. Maybe ideas just floated. Then it happened again. And again. I'd suggest something in a one-on-one, restructuring a workflow, adjusting a reporting cadence, flagging a risk. He'd nod vaguely, say, "We'll see." 2 weeks later, he'd present it as a spontaneous insight he'd had over the weekend, and people praised him for it. Great thinking, Mark. So proactive. This is why leadership matters. I became invisible in real time. The humiliation escalated. Not loud, not explosive. Worse. Publicly subtle. In meetings, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence with, "Let's not get into the weeds," then let someone else repeat my point 5 minutes later and thank them for it. Once, when I corrected a number he'd misstated, calmly, quietly, he smiled and said, "See? This is why I like having you around." Human calculator. The room laughed. I stopped speaking up after that. What I didn't stop doing was the work. I couldn't. It was automatic by then. I still checked the contracts, still followed up with legal, still chased confirmations, still reminded people of deadlines. Privately now, because doing it publicly apparently made me controlling. And then came the idea. It was big. Not flashy, but impactful. We were bleeding money on inefficiencies between departments, duplicate approvals, mismatched versions, delays that turned into penalties. I mapped it out over several late nights, not because anyone asked me to, but because I couldn't not see the problem once I'd noticed it. I drafted a proposal. Clear, simple, cost-saving. Tens of millions over a year, conservatively. I sent it to Mark with a short note. "I think this could help with the upcoming fund negotiations." He replied 3 hours later with one sentence. "Let's discuss." We didn't. A week passed. Then 2. Then I saw a meeting invite on the shared calendar. Strategic Optimization Initiative, Mark plus Exec Team. I wasn't invited. I knew. I knew before I even heard anything officially. That sick, sinking feeling settled in my stomach like a weight. The confirmation came the next day. Mark walked out of the conference room glowing. People congratulated him. Someone said, "Brilliant idea." Later, I got forwarded a summary deck. My deck. Not identical. Polished, rebranded. My name nowhere in sight. But the structure, the logic, even one of my phrasing quirks was there. He hadn't even bothered to change everything. I stared at my screen for a long time. Long enough that someone asked if I was okay. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just disrespect. It was theft. And somehow, that hurt more than being called background noise, because it meant he did see me. He just didn't think I deserved credit. After that, the humiliations became sharper, like he was daring me to react. Tasks beneath my role, petty corrections in front of others, comments about how I should be grateful to be learning by observation. Then came the boxes again. Not pens this time, files, old ones. "Can you reorganize these?" he asked loudly during a crunch week. "We're finalizing contracts," I said carefully. "And this," he replied, tapping the box, "is also work." That's when something inside me shifted from numb to alert. I went into the small meeting room, sat down, closed the door, and for the first time in years, I didn't send the reminder emails. I didn't check the final version. I didn't follow up. I discovered what happens when background noise goes silent. The funny thing about silence is that people don't notice it right away. They're so used to you compensating for everything that they assume the system will keep running on muscle memory alone. That Monday afternoon, I watched the office move like a badly rehearsed play, everyone hitting their marks, confident someone backstage was fixing the props. Someone used the wrong contract version. Someone forgot to press a single approval button. Someone assumed legal had signed off when they hadn't. No one checked with me. By late afternoon, the first crack appeared. A raised voice from the conference room. Then another. Mark stormed out, phone glued to his ear, face flushed in that specific way that meant money was involved. I stayed at my desk. By evening, it was chaos. Legal blaming finance blaming IT insisting they were never looped in. The deal with the foreign fund, the one everyone had been hyping for months, collapsed over an error in the final document. A stupid one. The kind that normally never made it past me. Minus 30 million. An hour later, someone finally noticed the second issue. A secondary contract had quietly expired at midnight. No renewal. No extension. One click would have saved it. Minus 20 million. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel smug. I felt hollow and oddly calm, like something I'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. Mark didn't scream this time. That was what scared everyone. He walked into the small meeting room where I was sitting alone, door closed, lights dimmed. He didn't slam it open. He didn't accuse. He sat down across from me slowly, like he was approaching an animal he didn't fully understand anymore. For a moment, he just looked at me. "Tell me honestly," he said, quieter than I'd ever heard him. "Was this all handled by you?" I didn't look up from my laptop. My hands were steady. My voice surprised even me. "Yes," I said. "But today I was sorting files." He blinked. "Once, twice." "You could have said something," he replied, tone shifting toward irritation, like this was a minor misunderstanding. "I did," I said. Repeatedly. He leaned back, exhaled sharply. "You can't just decide to disengage. That's unprofessional." I finally looked at him then. Really looked. The tailored suit. The expensive watch. The man who'd built a career on taking credit and delegating consequences. "You decided my job was background noise," I said evenly. "I adjusted accordingly." His jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic." There it was. The word he always used when accountability made him uncomfortable. "You're overreacting," he continued. "Everyone contributes. Ideas don't belong to one person." I almost laughed. Then why is my name never attached to them? I asked. Why do you repeat my work verbatim and call it leadership? He waved a hand dismissively. You're reading into things. You're very emotional right now. Emotional. Another favorite. I trusted you, I said, and that was the only moment my voice wavered. I brought you something that could have changed my role, my trajectory. You took it. You erased me. He leaned forward, eyes cold now. Careful, he said. You're replaceable. That hurt. Not because it was true, but because he believed it. I didn't know you were. He paused, searching for the word. This involved. You never asked, I replied. Silence stretched between us, heavy, uncomfortable. You've caused serious damage, he said finally. This will be noted. I nodded. So will everything else. He stood up abruptly. We're done here. As he walked out, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. This wasn't a confrontation where someone apologized and learned a lesson. This was the moment the illusion broke. He wasn't going to change, and I wasn't going to disappear quietly. When the door closed, my hands started shaking. Not from fear, from delayed adrenaline, from years of swallowing things finally hitting my bloodstream all at once. I sat there alone, listening to the muffled chaos outside, knowing that whatever happened next, I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't regret it. I thought I'd feel victorious after that meeting, or relieved, or at least justified. That's how these stories usually go when you replay them in your head. The quiet triumph, the moment where everything clicks into place, and you walk back to your desk taller than before. That's not what happened. What actually happened was, I went to the bathroom, locked myself into the farthest stall, sat down fully clothed, and stared at the door like my brain had short-circuited. My body was shaking in small, uncontrollable waves, like it had been holding a position for years and had finally been told it could rest. The anger came first. Hot, sharp, almost energizing. I replayed every moment I'd swallowed my pride, every time I'd let a comment slide, every meeting where I'd stayed quiet because I didn't want to be that person. I imagined all the things I could have said, the receipts I could have slammed on the table, the emails I could forward, the decks with metadata still attached to my name. Then the anger burned itself out. What followed was worse. Sadness. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind. The dull, heavy kind that settles in your chest and makes even breathing feel like effort. I felt stupid. Genuinely, painfully stupid. For believing that loyalty mattered. For thinking competence would protect me. For confusing proximity to power with safety. I cried silently so no one would hear. Because even then, even in that moment, I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. For days afterward, I existed on autopilot. I did my tasks. I smiled when spoken to. I answered emails. But inside, something fundamental had cracked. Every interaction felt slightly unreal, like I was watching myself from a distance. Mark didn't speak to me directly after that. He communicated through curt emails and other people. The humiliation shifted forms. Colder now, more bureaucratic. My responsibilities were quietly reduced. Meetings I'd always attended suddenly didn't require my presence. Projects I'd built were reassigned for efficiency. That hurt more than the shouting ever would have. I started doubting myself in ways I hadn't before. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just how corporate environments worked, and I was naive for expecting fairness. I reread old messages, trying to see if I'd imagined the disrespect. I minimized my own pain the way women are trained to do. At home, I was exhausted but couldn't sleep. My mind replayed conversations on a loop. I woke up at 3 a.m., convinced I'd made a catastrophic mistake by not protecting myself better. I thought about my resume. my savings, my age, all the invisible calculations you make when stability feels threatened. There was shame too. Deep, quiet shame. I didn't tell friends the full story because saying it out loud made it feel more real. My boss stole my idea sounded childish, even though it wasn't. I let myself be treated like furniture for years sounded worse. One evening, scrolling through this subreddit, I realized how many stories sounded just like mine. Different industries, different titles, same pattern, same gaslighting, same slow erosion of self-worth. That realization didn't make it hurt less, but it made me feel less alone. Acceptance didn't arrive suddenly. It came in fragments. A moment here, a thought there. The understanding that I hadn't failed, I'd been exploited. That my silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. That reacting sooner wouldn't necessarily have saved me, because the system was designed to reward people like Mark. I stopped blaming myself for not being louder. By the end of that week, I felt emotionally bruised but oddly clearer. The fog lifted just enough for me to see one hard truth. Staying was costing me more than leaving ever could. I wasn't healed. I wasn't confident. But I was done pretending this was just a rough patch. And that was the beginning of my next decision. The decision didn't come with fireworks. No dramatic resignation letter. No confrontation in the hallway where everyone suddenly realized my worth and clapped. Real life doesn't do that. It came quietly on a Wednesday evening while I was eating cold leftovers and staring at my laptop without actually seeing it. I opened a blank document and typed my name at the top. Just my name. That was it. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. Bone-deep tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. The kind of tired that comes from constantly bracing yourself, from shrinking a little more every day so someone else can feel bigger. The next morning, I went to work like usual. Same route, same coffee, same desk by the printer. But internally, something had shifted. I wasn't waiting to be noticed anymore. I wasn't hoping for fairness. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was observing. Once you decide to leave, the office changes. Or maybe you just finally see it clearly. The casual disrespect. The way people looked past me when Mark spoke. The way my contributions were treated as infrastructure. Essential, invisible, taken for granted. I started documenting everything. Not out of spite, but clarity. Dates, emails, versions of files. I saved drafts with timestamps. I forwarded myself conversations where ideas originated. I wasn't planning revenge. I just wanted my reality preserved somewhere outside my own head. Mark noticed the change. "You've been quieter than usual," he said one afternoon, leaning against my desk like we were on friendly terms. "I'm focused," I replied. He smirked. "Good. This isn't really a place for ambition, anyway." That sentence sealed it. I updated my resume that night. For the first time, I wrote down what I actually did. Not the watered-down version I'd been trained to present. It felt almost illegal, like admitting a secret. Operations coordination, contract oversight, risk prevention, cross-department workflow design. Reading it back made my chest ache. Not with pride, with grief. For how much I'd given to a place that never intended to give back. I applied quietly, selectively. I didn't tell anyone at work. I didn't ask for references. I relied on documented results instead of loyalty points. 2 weeks later, I got a call during lunch. A calm voice, clear questions. They'd seen my experience. They wanted specifics. I gave them specifics. A week after that, they sent an offer. Better title, better pay, clear boundaries, actual respect. I stared at the email for a long time before replying. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the realization that I could leave without burning everything down. That walking away wasn't weakness. It was self-preservation. I gave notice the next day. Mark didn't look surprised, just annoyed. "You're making a mistake," he said flatly. "You won't find this level of exposure elsewhere." I smiled politely. "I'm okay with that." He nodded, already disengaging. "We'll manage." He always believed that. On my last week, something interesting happened. Small things started slipping. Deadlines got missed. Questions went unanswered. People stopped by my desk looking confused. "Do you know where? Have you seen? Who usually?" I helped when I could. Then I gently reminded them I was leaving. On my final day, I packed my desk slowly. No one made a speech. No cake. No thank you email from leadership. Just a few coworkers who hugged me quietly and said, "I don't know how we'll do this without you." I didn't answer. I walked out carrying a box that felt lighter than the ones Mark had dumped on my desk months earlier. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. I used to think the hardest part would be leaving. It wasn't. The hardest part came afterward, in the quiet space where the adrenaline wore off, and I had to sit with what had happened without the daily distraction of survival. In the weeks after I left, my body slowly unlearned the office. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I stopped rereading emails in my head, searching for hidden accusations. I slept through the night for the first time in years. That alone told me I'd done the right thing. But clarity has a cost. Once the fog lifts, you start seeing patterns you didn't want to see. How carefully Mark had positioned himself as indispensable while outsourcing responsibility. How often my gendered reliability had been weaponized against me. How silence was rewarded until it wasn't useful anymore. I learned that humiliation at work is rarely loud. It's quiet, procedural, and often disguised as professionalism. It lives in jokes you're expected to laugh at, in feedback that never quite lands on performance, in ideas that are absorbed into leadership without attribution. I also learned that waiting for fairness from someone who benefits from your invisibility is a losing game. For a long time, I thought enduring was the same as being strong, that if I just stayed calm enough, competent enough, patient enough, things would eventually balance out. They didn't. They never do in systems built on imbalance. Strength, it turns out, wasn't staying. It was leaving without permission. The new job didn't magically fix everything. I still had moments of hesitation. I still prefaced emails with apologies that weren't necessary. I still braced for dismissal that never came. Healing from workplace humiliation isn't linear. It's layered. Some days you feel fine. Other days, a casual comment hits a nerve you didn't know was still exposed. But here's what changed. My work had edges now. Boundaries. My ideas were documented, discussed, and credited. When I spoke, people listened. Not because I was louder, but because respect was built into the culture, not rationed by ego. If you're reading this and wondering whether you're overreacting, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. If your contribution disappears the moment you stop protecting it, that's not teamwork. If your ideas only matter when someone else presents them, that's not mentorship. If your silence is more valued than your voice, that's not professionalism. It's control. My advice is boring, but honest. Document your work. Trust patterns, not apologies. And don't wait for someone who calls you background noise to suddenly hear you. You don't need a dramatic ending to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk out quietly and take your value with you. I thought leaving would be the end of it. Clean break. New badge, new inbox, new routines. I underestimated how long the old place would echo inside me. The first week at my new job felt unreal. People asked my opinion and actually waited for the answer. Meetings ended with clear decisions instead of vague power plays. When I sent a draft, It came back with comments instead of silence. No one talked over me. No one joked about me being supportive. The absence of tension felt almost suspicious, like the calm after a storm where you keep waiting for thunder. I kept waiting for the humiliation to restart in a new form. It didn't. What did happen instead was something quieter and more disorienting. My old company started calling. At first, it was harmless. A former coworker texting late in the evening. "Hey, quick question. Do you remember how the renewal process worked for X?" I answered once, then twice. Then the questions became more frequent, longer, more detailed. "Do you know why this vendor used to approve so fast? Where did you keep the backup files? Was there a workaround for this delay?" I realized what was happening when someone forwarded me an internal email by accident. Mark had written, "We need to reconstruct the previous workflow." Apparently, a lot of it lived informally. Informally. That was his word for me. I stopped replying. 2 days later, Mark himself emailed, "Polite. Too polite. Hope you're settling in well. We're running into some gaps and could use a bit of context. Perhaps a quick call?" I stared at the message longer than I should have. My stomach tightened, muscle memory kicking in. The urge to fix things, to be helpful, to smooth over chaos. It was still there, even after everything. I didn't reply. An hour later, another email. "This would be mutually beneficial." That phrase made me laugh, out loud. For the first time, I saw the situation clearly from the outside. The system I'd held together with duct tape and unpaid emotional labor was unraveling, not dramatically, not in a way that made headlines, but slowly, expensively, and without a clear culprit. And suddenly, my silence mattered again. I heard things through former coworkers, missed deadlines, confusion over responsibilities, deals taking longer, small errors compounding into visible losses. No single disaster, just the steady drip of inefficiency I'd once absorbed without credit. Mark blamed everyone. Legal wasn't aligned, finance was sloppy, operations lacked structure. No one said my name. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted recognition, but because erasure is a special kind of violence. You don't just lose credit, you lose proof you were ever there. At my new job, I struggled with something unexpected. Guilt. Guilt for leaving others behind. Guilt for not warning them. Guilt for not burning the place down on my way out. Guilt for surviving a system that kept chewing through people like me. It took a conversation with my new manager to snap me out of it. She noticed I was staying late unnecessarily, triple-checking work that didn't need it. "You know you don't have to earn the right to be here every day," she said gently. I nodded, then surprised myself by tearing up. That was the moment I understood how deeply the old humiliation had rewired me. I'd internalized the idea that rest was laziness, that boundaries were attitude, that respect was conditional. Unlearning that took time. One afternoon, weeks later, I ran into Mark at a conference. Completely unplanned. He didn't see me at first. I watched him from across the room. Same suit, same confident posture, same practiced smile. When he did notice me, his expression flickered. Just for a second. We exchanged polite nods. Nothing more. As I walked away, I realized something important. He looked tired. Not stressed. Not angry. Just worn. I felt no triumph. No urge to confront. No desire to explain myself. I didn't need closure from him anymore. The aftermath wasn't about revenge or validation. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself that had been slowly, quietly diminished. Leaving didn't end the story. It finally gave me space to hear my own voice again. Something people don't talk about enough after workplace humiliation is how it messes with your ability to trust good situations. Not just people, environments, systems, praise. At my new job, when someone said, "Great work," My first instinct was to wait for the punchline. When my manager credited me in a meeting, I felt a strange heat crawl up my neck, like I'd been exposed doing something wrong. Compliments made me uncomfortable. Transparency made me suspicious. I kept thinking, what's the angle? During my second month, I proposed a process improvement. Nothing revolutionary, just a cleaner way to track approvals across teams. As I spoke, I watched faces carefully, waiting for boredom, irritation, dismissal. Instead, people asked questions, real ones. They built on the idea instead of absorbing it. Someone said, "Let's make this yours. Can you lead the rollout?" I nodded automatically, then went back to my desk and felt a wave of panic. Lead it? Me? That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared of failing, but because I was scared of succeeding. Success meant visibility. Visibility used to mean danger. I realized how deeply I'd internalized the lesson that being seen was risky. Over the next few weeks, I caught myself shrinking in small ways, softening language, adding disclaimers, saying this might be a stupid idea before speaking, a habit I hadn't even noticed forming. Every time my manager gently corrected it. "Don't undercut yourself," she said once. "Just say the thing. Just say the thing." It sounded so simple. It felt impossibly hard. Outside of work, the impact showed up too. I was more guarded with friends, less willing to vent, afraid of sounding repetitive or bitter. I didn't want to be the person who couldn't let it go, even though it had taken years to build and only months to unravel. One evening, I finally told the full story to a close friend. Not the polished version, the ugly one, the pens, the erasure, the stolen idea, the silence. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't offer advice or perspective. She just said, "That was abuse." The word hit me harder than I expected. Abuse felt too strong, too dramatic. That was something that happened in obvious ways, right? But the more I thought about it, the more it fit. Abuse of power, abuse of trust, abuse disguised as professionalism. Naming it didn't make me weaker. It made the fog lift a little more. I stopped minimizing what had happened. I stopped joking about it. I stopped framing it as a learning experience before I was ready. At work, I practiced something radical. I let people see my competence without apology. I took credit when it was offered. I corrected people when they misattributed my work. My voice shook sometimes. I did it anyway. There were setbacks. Days when an offhand comment sent me spiraling. Moments when I almost replied to an old colleague's message out of habit. Times when I wondered if I'd just traded one illusion for another. But slowly, evidence piled up. My work was respected. My boundaries were honored. My silence was not required for harmony. Trust didn't come back all at once. It came in fragments. A meeting where my idea stuck. A deadline met without panic. A weekend where I didn't think about work at all. I started to believe that not every environment demanded my self-erasure as the price of entry. That belief changed everything, and it prepared me for something I didn't expect. The moment when my past finally caught up with my present in a way I couldn't ignore. I thought I was done being surprised by that job. I was wrong. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No drama, no warning. I was halfway through my coffee when an unfamiliar name popped up in my inbox. Someone from legal at my old company. The subject line was painfully neutral. Quick clarification. My heart rate spiked instantly, like my body recognized the threat before my mind could catch up. The email was polite, almost deferential. They were reviewing historical workflows and needed confirmation about who had authored certain process documents. My name appeared once, casually, like an afterthought. I stared at the screen, feeling that old tension creep back into my shoulders. This wasn't about clarity. This was about blame. I knew the pattern. Something had gone wrong. Money, most likely. And now they were reconstructing the past to figure out where responsibility could land. For a few minutes, I considered ignoring it. I didn't owe them anything. I'd left cleanly. I'd moved on. But then I remembered the files I'd saved, the timestamps, the forwarded emails, the quiet archive of my own reality. I replied. Brief, factual, no emotion. I attached documentation showing when the processes were created, by whom, and how they'd been approved. My name was there. Repeatedly. Mark's was not. Until much later, when he'd presented the work upward. An hour passed, then 2. Then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was before I answered. Mark. Hi, he said, voice tight. I got your email. I figured, I replied. There was a pause. I imagined him pacing, choosing words carefully for once. You didn't need to include all that, he said. It complicates things. I almost laughed again. Almost. I included what was accurate, I said. Nothing more. You're putting me in a difficult position, he replied, irritation bleeding through. No, I said calmly. I'm describing the position you were already in. Silence. This could reflect poorly on the team. He tried next. On everyone. I recognized the tactic immediately. Collective guilt. Shared responsibility. The same logic he'd used to erase me. I don't work there anymore, I said. Your team isn't my responsibility. His tone hardened. You don't have to be like this. Like what? Honest? I ended the call. That afternoon, a former coworker messaged me privately. Things are bad here, she wrote. There's an internal review. They're asking questions about how decisions were made. I didn't respond. Later that week, I learned more through the grapevine than I ever expected to know. The optimization initiative had failed. Not because the idea was flawed, but because no one understood it well enough to maintain it. Shortcuts were taken. Safeguards removed. The cost savings turned into losses. Leadership wanted answers. And suddenly, my absence was no longer convenient. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. Tired of being pulled back into a story I'd worked so hard to leave. Tired of being asked to clarify what had always been clear. What surprised me most was how little power the situation had over me now. The anxiety was there, yes, but muted, distant, like an old scar reacting to weather instead of a fresh wound. I'd already grieved that job. I'd already rebuilt my sense of self somewhere safer. Their chaos no longer defined me. A week later, I heard that Mark was exploring other opportunities. That was the phrasing. Corporate euphemism at its finest. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel satisfied. What I felt instead was something quieter and far more valuable. Release. The past had resurfaced, and it hadn't swallowed me whole. I had proof. I had distance. And for the first time, I had nothing left to prove. 2 parts left. For a long time, I thought there would be a moment where everything lined up neatly, where someone important would finally say, "We were wrong," and the past would rearrange itself into something fair. I imagined an ending with clarity, accountability, maybe even an apology that sounded like it meant something. What I got instead was quiet. After Mark started exploring other opportunities, the messages stopped. No more emails asking for clarification. No more calls from unknown numbers. The internal review apparently concluded without fanfare. No public reckoning. No announcement acknowledging the work that had been erased or the systems that had depended on me. Just silence. At first, that silence bothered me. It felt unfinished, like a sentence cut off mid-thought. I caught myself checking LinkedIn more often than I'd like to admit, half hoping to see some confirmation that the universe had kept score. When I didn't, irritation flared, quickly followed by shame for still caring. It took me a while to understand that I wasn't craving revenge. I was craving closure. And closure, inconveniently, is something workplaces almost never give you. At my new job, things continued steadily. Not explosively good, not miraculously transformative, just solid, healthy, predictable in the best way. I learned to trust routines again, to take weekends off without guilt, to log off without scanning for potential fallout. One afternoon, during a quarterly review, my manager said something that stopped me cold. "You're consistent," she said. Not in a flashy way, in a way that makes everything around you more stable. The old version of me would have heard that as faint praise, as being relegated to the background again. This time, I didn't. This time, I recognized it for what it was. Respect, without manipulation. Later that evening, I realized I hadn't thought about Mark at all that day. Not once. The realization surprised me. He'd taken up so much mental space for so long that his absence felt strange. Like noticing a chronic pain had disappeared only because you suddenly weren't bracing for it anymore. I stopped telling the story in my head over and over. Stopped refining the arguments I'd never make. Stopped wondering what I should have done differently. I accepted something difficult and freeing. Not every wrong ends with acknowledgement. Some end with distance. Some end with you becoming unreachable. Letting go didn't mean forgiving him. It meant releasing myself from the need to be seen by someone who had already chosen not to see me. I stopped defining that chapter by humiliation and started defining it by survival. I survived a system that benefited from my silence. I left without burning bridges or myself. I rebuilt without becoming bitter. That wasn't the ending I'd imagined, but it was a real one. And real endings, I've learned, are rarely dramatic. They're quiet, they're internal, and they change the way you move forward. One part left. If you'd asked me 2 years ago how this story would end, I would have said with proof, or justice, or at least a moment where everyone finally understood what had been done to me. I believed endings had to be loud to be real. I don't believe that anymore. What I have now is smaller, but stronger. I have work that doesn't hollow me out. I have boundaries that don't require defending every day. I have a sense of self that isn't negotiated in meetings or quietly erased in decks. And most importantly, I trust myself again. If you're reading this and seeing your own job reflected back at you, the jokes that don't quite land, the credit that never quite sticks, the way you're praised for being supportive, but never for being sharp, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not imagining it. Workplace humiliation doesn't always come with yelling or insults. Sometimes it's the slow grind of being indispensable and invisible at the same time. Sometimes it's being told you're replaceable while the place quietly falls apart without you. Sometimes it's being made to feel difficult for wanting your name attached to your work. None of that is a personal failure. It's a system problem. And you don't fix it by becoming smaller. If you're still there, surviving day to day, do what I didn't do soon enough. Document everything. Trust patterns over promises. Pay attention to how power moves in the room, not how it presents itself. And if you're thinking about leaving but feel guilty, afraid, or ungrateful, that's not loyalty. That's conditioning. You don't owe your silence to anyone who benefits from it. Leaving doesn't mean you lost. It means you chose yourself in a game that wasn't designed for you to win. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get public credit. I didn't get vindication. What I got was my life back. And that, in the end, was enough.